Hello, everyone, and happy Thanksgiving on this 24th day of November, 2022. I'm David Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. And up first, there are no watches, warnings, or advisories out around the state today, tonight, and probably into tomorrow as well. And even out in the Bering Sea and the southwest coast areas, Aleutians, no watches, advisories, or warnings out. About the closest thing to an advisory we had was a flood advisory for the Thorn River near Thorn Bay. Today you can see the stage took a jump there over the last 24 hours, and minor flood stage at 12.5 feet, and it crested at about 12.37 feet, already having occurred. They're just under minor flood stage, and should come down. So other than that, nothing really going on, kind of a dead weather pattern, except for southeast coast, another surge of moisture moving from southwest to northeast associated with low pressure that's finally kicking off to the east there toward Prince of Wales Island. That brought some rain across all the panhandle today with some gusty winds, gale force winds out along the coast up to 50 miles an hour today. And with that system, otherwise lighter precipitation amounts along the North Gulf Coast and into the southeast interior, just some areas of snow or flurries there. And you can see a weakening band of moisture coming across from the southwest interior, pushing right into Cook Inlet, mostly mid and high level clouds. No precipitation reported anywhere in Cook Inlet, the Kenai Peninsula today, although winds in response to that as it approached from the west did become southerly and bring a little bit warmer temperatures up into northern Cook Inlet, kicking up to around 30 degrees this afternoon at Anchorage State Airport with a wind gust of 28 miles an hour. Otherwise, temperatures in the upper 30s now at Homer and Kamishak Bay, rain at Seldovia, and then snow back at Iliamna, and just clouds moving across Kodiak Island, and lighter precipitation amounts, or a little bit heavier precipitation amounts with the bulk of the moisture down across the Alaska Peninsula. And moving this along again, you can see westerly flow across the Bering Sea and another shot of cold air with the open cell Q there moving across the Pribilof Island areas, but not much action out over the Aleutians. And on the chart today, developing low there near the Alaska Peninsula associated with that heavier cloud mass down there. That brought anywhere from 4/10 of an inch of precipitation down in Alaska today during the 12-hour period at 3 p.m. this afternoon, to about 1/4 of an inch at Cold Bay. Otherwise, the Panhandle, southeast coast, again with those gale force winds along the coast, and kind of breezy, blustery day for the southern southeast coast. There, rainfall amounts across the entire Panhandle range from 1 to 2/10 of an inch today. Otherwise, low pressure over the northern Bering Sea, and that front as it pushes eastward there brought several inches of snow to areas of the Seward Peninsula on down and across the southwest interior. Bethel picked up about a couple inches of snow, 1 to 2 inches there as it pushed through overnight last night, with the snow ending this afternoon out that way. And for tonight, that low will track east-northeast to just south of Resurrection Bay by about 3 a.m. on Friday morning there. So look for snow, several inches forecast to fall across areas of south central Alaska, Prince William Sound, and up into the Copper River Basin as well. And snow will move into Fairbanks area from the west tonight, with a low right around 0 in that area. Areas of snow with that low persisting there just west of the Seward Peninsula. Westerly flow off the Bering Sea will keep snow showers going along the southwest coast, even into Bristol Bay, and areas of snow along the lower and mid-Yukon River Valley areas. And western Arctic coasts could see some minor accumulations of light snow, maybe an inch or so into the western Brooks Range area. High pressure out over the Aleutians, making for pretty light winds and dry conditions out there all the way to the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Western Alaska Peninsula could see some clearing tonight. And rain and snow continues over the Panhandle, but amounts will be on the light side as that weak low continues to weaken. And then tomorrow, that low will kick eastward, but actually snowfall amounts across south central Alaska, not as gung-ho as it was the forecast earlier today, but delaying the start time Thursday night, tonight, look for the snow to move in. And then the amounts here, anywhere from 1 to 2 inches around Anchorage up in toward Palmer. And then, of course, Independence Mine area there. And into the Talkeetnas, maybe 3 to 4 inches. Could see 4 inches at Willow. Talkeetna, 3 to 4 inches, Chilitna up toward Cantwell, and then Valdez could see 6 to 8 inches of snow. Whittier could pick up 4 to 6 inches. Cordova forecasting 4 to 6 inches as well. McCarthy about 1 to 2 inches, but then to the north there, when you get into the upslope areas of the eastern Alaska Range, Paxton in that 8 to 12 inch forecast or possible snowfall zone there. So some pretty good snow coming in. Anything would be good, any additional snow. And what does fall overnight tonight and into tomorrow will probably stick around for a week or so. And for the Friday forecast, that front approaches the Panhandle, increasing wind and rain, especially over the central and southern southeast coast during the day tomorrow, especially in the afternoon. And then low pressure, again, right over the Seward Peninsula, areas of snow over the western interior from Bristol Bay up to the western Arctic coastal areas. Excuse me, and maybe even some flurries on the eastern Arctic coast, becoming showery in the afternoon for Cook Inlet, Manusca Valley. Could see some clearing late in the day, and then basically dry for the eastern interior with some light snow lingering from about, say, Delta down toward North Pole, Eagle, Chicken to Tok. Could see some areas of light snow throughout the day, and into the eastern Alaska Range and Abesna, and then down to McCarthy. Otherwise, for Friday, that low finally kicks inland right into the central interior from the Seward Peninsula there, getting nudged eastward by high pressure building into the eastern and northern Bering Sea. It's going to make for light winds, dry conditions there. St. Lawrence Island, light winds, mostly cloudy skies, all the way down to the Alaska Peninsula. After gusty northwest winds early in the day, Saturday for Kodiak Island, late Friday night, they'll begin to diminish in the afternoon, but look for clear skies, mostly clear skies, dry conditions, and colder temperatures into south central Alaska with that north to northwest wind flow, and look for some clearing and dry. And the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, dry, maybe some flurries lingering over the central eastern Copper River Basin. Areas of light snow, pretty widespread over anywhere over the eastern interior on down into the Kuskokwim Valley. And weak lows still off the central coast of the Panhandle, keeps it kind of unsettled over the central and southern areas, mostly dry from Juneau up toward Haines, Skagway, Elfin Cove. Next system pushing wind and rain into the western Aleutians early or late Friday night, and then pushing eastward during the day, and by afternoon look for an increase in the winds and rain even for the Fox Islands. And then going to lows for tonight in the 30s for the Panhandle, near freezing for Kodiak Island. Otherwise, single numbers in teens, Copper River Basin, Susitna Valley, Kuskokwim Valley, upper teens, lower 20s from Bristol Bay, 20 to 25, south central Alaska. And highs for Friday afternoon in right around 20 for the Copper River Basin, mid-20s for the interior areas, upper teens to lower 20s, Kuskokwim Valley, mid-20s to lower 30s for Bristol Bay, and near freezing, northern Panhandle to near 40 around Skagway around Sitka, and 42 save for Annette. Followed by lows, mid-20s, northern Panhandle, upper 30s elsewhere. Single numbers, Madanuska, Susitna Valley, Copper River Basin, lower teens, Kuskokwim Valley, near 30 for Kodiak. And then highs, 15 to 20 west of the Alaska Range, otherwise 20 to 25 for south central Alaska, 30s to near 40 for the Panhandle. Up to the north. Looking at lows tonight, a little below zero there from Arctic Village down into the Yukon Flats, Chalk-Yitzhak, Fort Yukon, and maybe Beaver, and possibly Northway and Tok. Otherwise, single numbers for the mid-Tanana Valley area, becoming closer to 10 to 15 out toward the Seward Peninsula, lower 20s for St. Lawrence Island. And highs tomorrow, 5 to 15 for the Arctic Coast North Slope, single numbers into the Brooks Range and the northeast interior, 10 to 15 in the Tanana Valley, mid-20s out toward Norton Sound, followed by lows, upper teens to lower 20s for Norton Sound and Seward Peninsula, and 5 to 10 below for the northeast interior to the eastern Arctic coast, otherwise 0 to 5 for the western Arctic coast, and single numbers in the Tanana Valley, followed by highs right around 10 to 15 central interior, either side of 0 for the Brooks Range, generally above 0 for the Arctic coast, lower 20s, Seward Peninsula. Out to the southwest, we've got lows tonight, mid to upper 20s for the southwest coast, right around freezing for St. Paul, mid-30s for the Alaska Peninsula and the central Aleutians, upper 30s out towards Shimya and Attu. And then the highs Friday afternoon, upper 30s for the Pribilofs, lower 40s for all of the Aleutians. Alaska Peninsula right around 40 degrees to Kodiak and the southwest coast in the lower 30s, upper 20s for St. Lawrence Island. And then for Saturday morning for the lows, lower to mid-20s for the southwest coast and Novak Island, right around 30 for St. George, and lower to mid-30s for the Alaska Peninsula, upper 30s for Nikolsky, westward to Adak and Atka, including Shimya, and about, let's see, moving on to the highs for Saturday afternoon, 25 to 30 for the southwest coast, mid-20s St. Lawrence Island, upper 30s for the Pribilofs, and now 45 to 50 for the central Aleutians, lower 40s for Shimya, lower 40s for the eastern Aleutians, upper 30s for the Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And flying weather for Friday morning. We got IFR from the northwest coast, down across the Kobuk Valley into the central interior, across the Yukon River, down into the central Alaska Range, Susitna Manduska Valley, northern Cook Inlet, and across the Copper River Basin. And some IFR there for the east side of Kodiak Island up to Fognak Island into the Gulf, and a narrow strip there from right around Nome down toward Savunga and Gamble, and a little bit up there on the western Arctic coast. Southern Bering Sea, the Aleutians, VFR, right up to the Alaska Peninsula, marginal for the Pribilofs to the southwest coast. And the southeast coast has a little bit of marginal VFR down to the south and southeast, otherwise VFR. For the afternoon, that all becomes IFR for the Panhandle up to Yakutat, right on up across, let's see, into the Copper River Basin and along and north of the Alaska Range. Some IFR in the Kuskokwim Valley, otherwise becoming VFR, Manduska, Susitna Valley, Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula westward to Adak, Kiska, mostly VFR. Marginal for Shimya and Attu, northern Bering Sea marginal VFR. And the western northern interior has areas of marginal VFR with IFR, especially up to the north and northeast there on out to the Arctic coast. And for the day Saturday morning, again, some IFR there in the Kuskokwim Valley and up into, looks like about Nenana to Fairbanks, and then over toward Northway and Toke. Otherwise, IFR from the Brooks Range out across the north slope to the Arctic coast. Some IFR in areas eastern Norton Sound, and then down along the west side of the Kuskokwim Mountains. And some IFR, mostly IFR for the Panhandle. VFR, though, western Copper River Basin, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula, and most areas south and east of the Alaska Range, Kodiak Island VFR, and the southern southeast Bering Sea looking really good. Some IFR now sliding eastward, just catching Amchitka, Kiska, and pushing in toward Adak with marginal VFR approaching Atka. And for the afternoon, IFR advances eastward across Atka Island, extending back to the western Aleutians. Pribilofs right on the edge of the marginal VFR there, marginal VFR across the Fox Islands. Otherwise, interior Alaska, areas of VFR with some areas of marginal VFR and some isolated areas of IFR. Passes, Anatuvik, IFR tomorrow. Pretty good IFR conditions for Adigan as well. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR, maybe a little lower on the western entrance of both passes. Rainy, marginal VFR, possibly lower on the western approach. And windy, possibly IFR in the northern entrance, maybe, otherwise marginal VFR there. Isabel, IFR throughout the day, especially north entrance, and Mintest also IFR. Tanita, marginal VFR, excuse me, becoming VFR. Portage, VFR. Chilcoot and White, IFR. And the freezing levels, 2,000 feet right along the central eastern Aleutians, and just catching Prince of Wales Island with colder air now all the way, or the surface down to Kodiak Island, and just off the North Gulf Coast, cutting into the central and southwest Panhandle, and nudging up northward a little bit there to just east of St. Matthew Island off the southwest coast. And for icing, look for some areas of isolated moderate rime icing, mostly Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, and across the Panhandle. and also elevated threat there along the southwest coast, and possibly some isolated icing up along the northwest coast, western Arctic coast there to about Point Barrow, and then over the western North Slope. Looking at the jet stream, coming across the Bering Sea from the west and northwest up to 115 or 125 knots, right across the Alaska Peninsula, turning more westerly at about 130 knots across southern Gulf of Alaska, then diving southeastward across the Queen Charlotte. So most of interior Alaska and the Panhandle on the cold side of the jet. So at 9,000 feet, about the same pattern there. West-northwest, 45 to 50 knots Bering Sea, and 65 knot westerlies there south of the Gulf of Alaska, diminishing as it blows in across the Panhandle, kind of diverging there. 3,000 feet, 40 knot westerlies there across the southeast Bering Sea into Bristol Bay, 45 knot northwesterlies, eastern Kenai Peninsula. Turbulence, look for moderate chop. Kodiak Island, Kamishak Bay, Kachemak Bay, as well as the southwest coast and into the southwest interior and along the Panhandle.
Howdy, Welcome Watchers, Trace here. Last week we found the Pleiades, a gorgeous open star cluster, and this week we'll use it and a few other stars to find Perseus and Medusa's severed head. So let's hit the darkness. Our skies are set to 5 a.m. looking west. Starting at the Pleiades, hop up and right to Capella and Auriga, then down and right to Merfolk. Merfolk translates to elbow, Perseus's elbow in this case. Perseus is the legendary Greek hero who slew Medusa. We see him on his back here in kind of a V shape. Merfolk is the upper tine, but the lower is Algol, the eye of Medusa. Algol is a 3-star system, so it dims and brightens over time, which is kind of creepy, and it goes by another name, Ras Al Ghul, meaning head of the demon. If you need another way to find Percy, just look for the distinctive W of Cassiopeia. He's always nearby. Thanks for watching, and keep looking up.
The beluga whale, also known as the white whale, lives in large groups and are unusual among whales. They have no dorsal fin, large bulbous heads, and they can actually swim backwards. To feed, they produce sound to find and hunt fish and invertebrates, and they use sound to communicate.
They're also known as the canaries of the sea because they make such a diversity of noises. They make chirps and whistles and gurgles and trumpeting sounds. They just make all kinds of sounds.
In the U.S., beluga whales live in the cold waters of Alaska, and there are 5 separate populations. Of those 5, the Cook Inlet population is the smallest, and it's declined by about 75%. Subsistence hunting may have contributed to this initial population drop, but this practice was regulated starting in 1999, with the last hunt in 2005. Still, the beluga population here has yet to recover.
We listed Cook Inlet beluga whales as an endangered species under the Endangered Species Act in 2008, and we had hoped that the population would start recovering, but we are still seeing a continued decline. And these beluga whales are only found in Cook Inlet, and so if they go extinct, we don't think any other belugas will come back and populate this area.
These whales spend most of their summer near Anchorage, Alaska's largest city, where threats to belugas are on the rise as the city grows. These may include diminishing food, habitat loss or destruction, pollution, toxins, and human-caused noise, which hampers their ability to feed and communicate. Researchers are trying to understand which of these threats may be impacting them most, but Cook Inlet is a tough place to work.
It's really hostile for research. We have the strong tides, which makes it challenging for human safety, and we can't see through the water. It is very muddy, so we're pretty much limited to the part of the animal that breaks the surface of the water. And as a result, we have limited information about the specific population dynamics of Cook Inlet beluga whales.
Up until recently, information has mainly come from annual aerial surveys from aircraft and boat or shore-based photo identification surveys that use unique markings to tell animals apart. Scientists also use passive acoustics to listen for belugas. but none of these methods can detect much information about their health.
So it's really been a game changer with the whole species in the spotlight designation. We've gotten more resources within our agency.
For instance, we're able to use a drone to collect some aerial imagery of belugas in the wild, and we're hoping to learn some information about the age classes, information about the health status.
And probably the most important bit of information that we'll get out of that is we'll be able to identify the new calves. And we're hoping if we keep doing this every year, we'll be able to get an estimate of calf production every year that will tell us something about how well the population's doing.
We are also expanding upon our biopsy studies, hopefully to give us some information about sex, the individual's reproductive status, some genetic information, some contaminant loads.
Public and private partners are contributing as well. Some are looking at toxin levels in the whale's prey, while others are analyzing beluga teeth to learn about their age and past diet. Others monitor water quality and how belugas react to boats, and more check to see if their behavior changes with increased background noise. All of these findings will go toward developing effective recovery strategies for this population.
As for what you can do, if you're out boating, give belugas space. Don't drive right up next to them. Stay about 100 yards away. If you're flying over them, just remember that you're putting noise into the water as well, and so stay at least 1,500 feet above them. Report a stranded beluga whale as soon as possible, and that's if they're dead stranded or live stranded. The amount of information that we can learn from these animals by responding to a stranding is monumental, and it will help our efforts to recover them.
Together, we can help beluga whales thrive in the dynamic waters of Cook Inlet. With continued research and good stewardship, we hope to see this population grow in the years to come.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And marine forecasts for the south coast. West to southwest winds, 25 knots for Friday, a little bit stronger on the north coast, south to southwest at 30 knots. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, northern inner channels, north winds 10 knots, southeast 15, Stevens Passage, and southeast at 25 for Clarence Strait. And for Saturday, west winds 30 knots on the south coast, seas at around 20 feet. Lighter winds on the north coast and out on the northeast, 15 to 20 knots. But Lynn Canal looking at a north wind, 35 knots, southeast 20 knots for the central and southern inside channels with 5-foot seas. Prince William Sound, gale warnings for Friday, west winds 35 knots, seas at 8 feet. And for the North Gulf Coast, northwest winds 30 knots, 11-foot seas. Gale warnings for Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, winds out of the west at 35 knots. For Cook Inlet, west winds 10 to 25 knots with 2 to 5-foot seas. For Saturday, Cook Inlet, winds will be north to northwest at 10 to 25 knots. Kamishak Bay, northwest winds 35 knots, northwest at 40 for the Barren Islands. North Gulf Coast, northwest winds 30 knots, seas 12 feet. Prince William Sound, winds northwest at 30 knots with 6-foot seas. And for Kodiak Island, Friday, west winds 25 to 30 knots. Otherwise, the Alaska Peninsula, west-northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. In Bristol Bay, winds will be out of the west at 25 knots with 8-foot seas. Then for Saturday, northwesterlies for Bristol Bay at about 20 knots. East-northeast winds 25 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. And Kodiak Island, west to northwest winds 20 to 30 knots. Eastern Aleutians, north to northeast winds 15 to 25 knots. Central Aleutians, north to east winds 15 to 25 knots. Western Aleutians, east to southeast winds 25 to 30 knots. And for Saturday, Western Aleutians, northeast to southeast winds at 30 knots. And Adak and Natka, Central Aleutian areas, southeast winds 30 to 35 knots. And east-southeast winds 30 to 35 knots for the Eastern Aleutians. And for the southwest coast on Friday, west winds 30 to 35 knots. Gale warnings along the Yukon Delta coast. Gale warnings also out for St. Matthew Island for west winds at 35 knots with 16-foot seas. Pribilof's looking at west winds at 25 knots with 12-foot seas. And 20-knot winds out of the northwest for St. Lawrence Island. Southwest at 20 for Norton Sound with 4-foot seas. And for Saturday, west winds at 25 knots for Norton Sound, And swell craft advisories also for St. Lawrence Island, northwest winds 20 knots, sea 7 feet. And for the southwest coast, north winds 25 knots, 7 to 10 foot seas, northeast at 30 knots for the St. Matthew Island area. And for the Pribilofs, winds will be east at 35 knots with seas 14 feet. And up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, northeast winds on Friday at 15 to 20 knots. Moving over to the central coast, winds will be northeast at 25 knots, seas at about 5 feet. And swell craft advisories also for the western Arctic coast, northeast winds there 30 knots, 9 to 11 foot seas in the Chukchi Sea, northeast winds 25 knots, seas at about 6 feet. And for Saturday, Chukchi Sea, north winds at 30 knots, northeast 25 knot winds for the area from Point Hope to Cape Lisburne, western Arctic coast, northeast at 20 knots, and for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast, winds will be north 15 knots with seas in the ice-free waters at around 3 feet. And for tonight, got snow coming in to south central Alaska, low pressure passing just south of the Kenai Peninsula. Several inches of snow possible across the area there, with areas of snow actually falling over much of the central and western interior, becoming more showery and flourishy as you head east there into the mid and upper Tanana Valley, and probably nothing over toward the border. But the panhandle, rain and snow continues at times. On the light side, though, high pressure takes over the southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And then, excuse me, then for tomorrow, rain, moderate to heavy at times over the southern panhandle, rain and snow to the north, and some snow showers lingering over Kodiak Island with northwest winds, and snow showers ending for Cook Inlet and south central Alaska with a little bit colder temperatures, areas of snow over the western interior. And for Saturday, the next storm.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.